Kia ora koutou, ko Denise Ives tōku ingoa. I'm Denise, and I'd like to welcome you to our World Breastfeeding Week presentation, The Early Days of Breastfeeding. When I was asked to do this, I struggled to work out where to start. There's so much information and so many different things I could tell you. I decided in the end to go by answering some of the questions I get asked most. So let's make a start on that. These are the kinds of questions I get asked most often. How do I get breastfeeding off to a good start? How do I know my baby's getting enough? How and when should I get my baby into a routine? Why do my nipples hurt? When can I give a bottle? And even should I be giving a bottle at all? How can my partner bond with our baby? And when will my milk come in? So let's get started on these questions. So breastfeeding is natural. Everybody hears people saying breastfeeding is natural. So why is it sometimes just so complicated and difficult for people to do? I think some of it's due to us not growing up with large families these days. We don't tend to have lots of younger siblings growing up and being breastfed around us as we grow up. So it's not something we see that often. People tend to be having fewer children, and our families are spread around. And we're all busy. People are out working and doing things, and we just don't see that many babies being breastfed. Breastfeeding is natural. It's what human babies were designed to have. But although it's an instinctive thing for a baby to breastfeed, it's still something that we need to learn to do, like walking and talking. And all of these things have kind of trial and error along the way and things that go wrong. So breastfeeding, I think, is a little bit like that. I often think of it as a dance where we're with this new person that we've never met before. We know the steps, we know what we're meant to be doing, but it takes a little bit of time to get to know each other, work out how we're meant to do it. And eventually, after some practice and treading on each other's toes a few times, we get it right. So let's start at the beginning. When your baby's first born, he or she is likely to want to feed within the first hour. If you ask for your baby to be placed skin to skin with you after they're born, you'll notice after a little bit of time that their head might start bobbing around, they might start licking their lips, maybe licking their hands and putting their hands to their mouth, and they will actually make their way to the breast on their own. Your body will start making milk from around halfway through your pregnancy, and this first milk is called colostrum. It's made in quite small quantities, but some mums notice that they leak a little bit of colostrum towards the end of their pregnancy, and others don't notice anything at all. And it doesn't matter because it's not an indicator of how much milk you're going to make later on once your baby is there. Colostrum's made in small quantities because babies have small tummies. So if you look at these pictures on the screen here, the bottle on the left has got colostrum in it, and you can see there's not actually very much. It's a lovely, beautiful golden colour, and it's often a little bit thicker than milk, perhaps, that you're used to seeing. The milk on the right is mature milk or more mature milk, and that's the milk you'll have after a few days once your milk comes in. So babies have very tiny tummies and they need to feed often. So if we look at this picture here, this will give you an idea of what's going on. On the first day that your baby's born, the walls of their stomach can't stretch, so they can only take very tiny feeds. They'll probably have about 3 feeds in their first 24 hours, and each one's going to only be around 5 to 7.5 millilitres, which is only about a teaspoon or a teaspoon and a half. By around day 3, your baby's stomach capacity will have increased. They'll be able to take around 8 feeds a day by now, and each feed's going to be around 4.5 to 5.5 teaspoons at a time. And by the end of the second week, anywhere between kind of 10 and 14 days, your baby will be taking between 60 and 85 millilitres per feed. And they're going to be feeding at least 8 times a day still, but probably it's more likely going to be around 10 to 12 times a day. So you can see over those first few days, your baby's stomach capacity and how much milk they need and how often they feed increases rapidly. But once it gets to that stage, it tends to stay that way for a while. So I mentioned there about milk coming in. Now this usually happens around about day 3. It may be a little bit later, a little day or two later, perhaps, if you've had a cesarean section. And what you will probably notice is that your breasts suddenly feel much fuller and they might feel quite firm to touch. And this can sometimes make it really hard for the milk to flow and sometimes difficult for the baby to attach well to the breast as well. It's also a time when you might feel a little bit more emotional than you have been feeling. And it's quite normal to feel this way, but it can be a really good time to limit the visitors and just snuggle down together and spend some time getting to know each other. If your breasts do feel really full and uncomfortable at this time, the best thing that you can do is remove milk as much as possible. Now, that might be by your baby feeding, or it might be if your baby's struggling to feed that you need to express some milk to help soften your breast and get the milk moving so that your baby can attach more easily. One of the ways to do this is to use warmth. So you could use a warm washcloth on your breast, or you could have a shower or a bath, or just lean over the basin in the bathroom and just run some warm water over your breast to help get the milk moving. If you're feeling uncomfortable, then using a cool compress in between doing this can help your breast feel a little bit more comfortable and less swollen and painful. One really good thing to do is breast massage together with hand expressing. And this is a really good thing to learn to do for any stage during your breastfeeding journey, not just at the beginning here when you might be feeling this engorgement of your milk coming in. So rather than trying to explain to you how to do that, I'm going to show you a video of how that works.
Every woman has a different journey throughout her breastfeeding experience. Breast massage and hand expression have been used throughout the generations and in different cultures to assist in that journey. At times during breastfeeding, a mother may find hand expression helpful to empty her breasts. It can be helpful when the breasts are full, engorged, or with a plugged duct. Many mothers find that using hand expression before and after pumping will help them empty their breasts better. It can be useful when a mother is separated from her infant and in cases of emergencies or natural disasters when electrical power is not available. Hand expression is simple, free, and can be done at any place and any time. To hand express, start with a light and gentle massage of your breast. Make sure your hands are warm. You can roll your breasts between your hands with one hand underneath the breast and the other over. Massage can also be done when kneading the breast with one or both hands. Or you can use the fingertips to gently tap and massage all over the breast. Rolling the breast very gently, combined with kneading and gentle tapping, all help to stimulate milk letdown and help ready the breast for hand expression. Start by positioning your fingers in a straight line with the nipple. Bring the fingertips together while gently compressing behind the nipple. As needed, adjust the position of your fingers while looking for the location which produces the most milk. Continue rhythmically. Adding a third finger with your other hand may help improve expression. While expressing, some mothers may notice sprays and others drips of milk. Here, the mother is expressing herself using a pattern rhythm. When milk stops flowing, gently massage and reposition the fingers to assist milk drainage from other areas of the breast. At times of engorgement or plugged ducts, breast massage with olive oil may provide more comfort for the mother. Massaging with gentle hand strokes directed toward the armpit may help reduce the swelling. Apply pressure similar to that a mother would use to rub lotion onto her skin. Reducing swelling helps improve milk removal. If engorged, Continue with gentle fingertip massage of the nipple and areola. Massage of the nipple and areola, alternated with hand expression, helps soften the area before the baby latches. Remember, when hand expressing, you will need to adjust your fingers to find the location where milk flows best. When your fingers are placed too close to the nipple or too far away, milk removal becomes harder. Throughout the world, there are many approaches to hand expression and breast massage. The techniques shown in this video are just one guide. If you are having breastfeeding difficulties, you should seek further assistance.
Okay, so I'm going to stop that there. So just a couple of things to think about. You saw some mothers when they were expressing there, the milk was spurting out in streams. When you're expressing colostrum in the early 2 or 3 days, then remember the quantity is going to be much smaller. You're not likely to see those streams of milk, and you might want to collect it in a teaspoon or something like that rather than a bowl, because there will be a smaller quantity, and that way you can actually give your baby the milk straight from the teaspoon if you want to. Okay, so we've got milk, we know it's there. How do we actually feed our baby? So before we get into too much on looking at how that works, I just want to look at these two pictures. So the picture on the left is a mama feeding her baby with a bottle, and you can see that the baby is laying on his back with his side towards the mum, and she's just holding him around the back of his head. I'm not sure whether you can see that. The picture on the right, you can see that the baby is turned entirely to face the mum. So the whole of the baby's body is against the mum's body, and the baby's at an angle. So he's not held horizontally across her body. She's got his bottom dropped lower down. So just while you're thinking about how all of this works, try and keep in your mind the picture of the baby turned entirely against your body. So let's see how this looks. There are 3 things that I think are really important to think about when you're feeding your baby, no matter what position you decide you're going to use. And there are a whole heap of positions, but really it doesn't matter which one you use, so long as it's the one that feels comfortable for you and your baby. So always hold your baby so that their tummy and their body is against your body. So tummy to mummy. When you bring your baby to the breast, what you want to be aiming for is for their nose, or just kind of between their nose and their top lip, to be close to your nipple. You're not aiming your nipple straight at your baby's mouth. And when your baby comes to the breast, they're going to come to the breast with their chin first. So what does all that actually look like? Right, I'm going to show you a sequence of photos. So in these pictures, the baby is held with the baby's tummy against the mummy. The mum's got her hands with the heel of her hand between the baby's shoulder blades at the top of the baby's back, and she's got her thumb on one side of the baby's neck and her fingers on the other side of the baby's neck. So you can see here she's starting with her nipple just between the baby's nose and her top lip. She's going to wait for the baby to open its mouth very wide, and you can see as the baby opens its mouth wide, the tongue comes forward over the bottom gum as well. And then as the baby opens wide, she brings the baby into her breast. So she brings the baby to her rather than leaning forward to put her breast into the baby's mouth. And she's doing that by pulling the baby in from the shoulders. And there you can see the baby is attached to the breast with a really wide open mouth. You can just see that the chin is making a slight dent in the breast, and the baby's nose is actually quite free of the breast tissue. So bringing the baby in from the shoulders is actually quite important. It helps the baby relax so that their head can tilt back and their chin can come in first. Sometimes babies have a sore head when they're first born, so touching the baby's head can actually be really uncomfortable for them, and you don't want to do anything that's going to put them off from wanting to feed. And the other thing I always think as if I was eating or I was about to eat and somebody pushed my head towards my food, my instinct would be to push away. So you don't want to be trying to pull your baby to your breast by their head when that's going to lead them to actually want to push away anyway. So things to think about. So you've got tummy to mummy first. Their nose is going to be near your nipple. Their chin's going to come in first. And the other thing I always think of is apples and oranges. And when I'm talking about is thinking about when you eat an apple, often you'll get your apple and you go like this, and it's your bottom jaw that comes to the apple first, and you get a really nice wide open mouth. And that's what your baby's doing. They're coming to the breast with their bottom jaw first, so their chin, and that helps them get a nice wide open mouth and a really good mouthful of breast tissue. And when I'm talking about oranges, I'm talking about sucking the wedge of an orange and getting lots of juice, as opposed to using a straw where the lips are pinched and the cheeks are sucked in, and it's just all very tight. So you want your baby to have a nice wide open mouth so that they get lots of breast tissue. So we know how to feed our baby. When do we feed our baby? So we know when a baby's crying, often people will pick them up and feed them, and often we consider that to be the baby's sign that they're telling us that they're hungry. But babies actually give us lots of other hints that they're hungry before they get to that point. And if you can look out for those feeding cues before your baby's crying, it can be a lot easier to feed them. Once the baby's crying, they're kind of agitated and they're disorganized. And when a baby cries, often their tongue is higher in the roof of their mouth, which makes it harder for them to attach to the breast well, because as we saw in that picture, their tongue needs to be forward and low in their mouths to help grasp the breast and get a mouthful of breast tissue. So the things that you can look out for, if you keep your baby close to you all the time, so you have the opportunity to see these signs that they're getting hungry, you might notice your baby stirring, opening their mouth, turning their head around. People call it rooting, and what they're doing is they're saying, hey, where's the breast? Where's my food? And they're looking with their mouth, but they're also looking with their cheeks. You'll notice if you touch a baby's cheek, they'll instinctively turn that way because they're looking for the breast, and so that's what they're doing. So if you can get your baby when they're at that stage, then they're going to be much calmer, and you've got much more time to get yourself into a good position, wait for that lovely wide open mouth and attach your baby. Going on from there, they'll get a bit more wriggly, they'll start stretching, moving around, they might put their hands in their mouth, and then you get to those later signs where your baby's getting agitated and crying and looking all hot and bothered. Now, some babies go from I'm just waking up to I'm now screaming very, very quickly, and you don't always feel like you have the opportunity to see those signs. So don't panic if your baby does that. Pick them up and give them a cuddle. Calm them down, and then you can try to feed them. Sometimes popping your finger in the baby's mouth with the pad of your finger up to the roof of the baby's mouth, and you just touch the roof of their mouth and they'll start to suck your finger, and that can help calm them down as well, so that you can have a go at feeding your baby. So once your baby is attached to the breast and calm, you let them feed for as long as you want to and as long as they want to. Your baby will probably suckle quite quickly to start with, and that will trigger your what we call the milk letdown, so the milk to start flowing. And you might feel this as a tingling or aching feeling in your breast, or you might not feel it at all. Some mums don't feel it, and that's absolutely normal as well. What you might notice though is you can hear your baby swallowing, and you'll know that they're suddenly getting more milk. Once the milk starts to flow, your baby's suck pattern will change from the suck, 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 get the milk going, to a suck, suck, swallow, suck, suck, swallow. And you'll see that they do a very small kind of pause, or you'll notice that their chin drops right down, and that's when you know that they've got a mouthful of milk and they're swallowing. Once your baby stops actively suckling like that, they may fall asleep and come off the breast, or they may just hang out quietly. At that point, you can take your baby off, you can just hold them, and if they're completely settled and happy, then you can just snuggle up and have a rest together. If your baby is still unsettled at that point and not ready for sleep, then you can offer the other breast. In the early days, your baby's going to feed often, which is great. It's great for them. It gets them lots of calories, lots of energy so that they can be awake and feeding and doing all this huge amount of growing that happens in the early months. And it's also very good for your supply, because the more often you feed your baby, your breast will empty, and that's the sign for your body to make more milk. If you leave milk in your breast, then the message goes back that the milk's not needed because it's still there, and the supply starts to slow down. So lots of feeding, lots of emptying your breast or removing milk is really, really good, especially in those first early weeks. So you're never going to be wrong to offer your baby a breastfeed, because they have to actively take part in the feeding. They have to help trigger the milk to flow and keep it flowing. If your baby doesn't want to feed or they're not hungry, they just won't. So you're not going to overfeed your baby or do the wrong thing by offering them a milk, a drink. So that's a huge amount of information. So we're going to watch another video that just pulls all of that together so you can see what it looks like in real life.
Attaching your baby at the breast. Breastfeeding is natural, and it's also a skill that can take some time and practice to learn. The key to successful breastfeeding is good attachment. If your baby is attached deeply to your breast, she will get more milk and breastfeeding will be more comfortable. This video will show how to deeply attach your baby and how to tell if she is attached well. There is a common misunderstanding that babies get milk by simply sucking on the nipple like a straw. If your baby is only attached to your nipple, she will get very little milk. But when she takes more of your breast in her mouth, your milk will come more easily. How you attach your baby to the breast is important for her ability to feed effectively and for you to make enough milk for her growing needs. A look inside the baby's mouth in the baby's mouth. With the nipple deeper in his mouth, he is able to suckle more effectively, triggering the milk to flow. Good attachment is the key to breastfeeding success. In contrast, in a shallow attachment, the nipple is centered in the baby's mouth, which is not wide open. The nipple lands under the hard roof of the mouth. As the baby sucks, the nipple gets pinched. This is painful and may injure the nipple. The baby is also unable to suck effectively and so cannot get much milk. What steps can you take to help your baby attach deeply? First, breastfeed in the first hours after birth. Healthy babies have instinctual feeding behaviors that help them find the breast and attach. Many mothers find that continuing this natural position in the early days and weeks makes it easy for their babies to attach deeply. Next, start with a calm baby. Feed her whenever she starts to show signs that she's hungry. Notice her feeding signals. Moving her lips, bringing her hand to her mouth, and turning her head from side to side. Now is the time to feed your baby before she starts to cry. Then hold your baby in a way that makes her feel secure and helps her feed most easily. Bring your baby to you, holding her close, facing and touching your body. Your baby's neck should be straight with her ear, shoulder, and hip in line. This will make it easier for her to swallow. Many mothers make the mistake of trying to push their nipple into their baby's mouth or trying to attach the baby when the mouth is not wide open. This is not ideal because the nipple will end up just inside, pressed against the hard roof of the mouth, which is painful and doesn't let the baby feed as well. Instead, lightly touch your nipple to your baby's upper lip. This will make her open her mouth. Be patient. Wait for her to open her mouth very wide, like a yawn. Then quickly bring her towards you so she takes a big mouthful of breast. Pulling your baby in gently from behind her shoulders as she takes the breast can deepen the attachment. In the second example, the baby's nose is opposite the nipple. He opens very wide. His lower lip stays at the base of the areola, and the nipple is aimed at the top of his mouth. The baby leads with his chin. The mother's hand behind her baby's shoulders moves him straight onto the breast. He attaches deeply and drinks well. Here are a few other points. If you hold your breast, be sure your fingers are away from your nipple so your baby has room to attach deeply. Here, the mother's fingers are too close to the nipple. They'll be in the way of the baby taking a large mouthful of breast. Like many mothers, you may worry that your baby cannot breathe easily while feeding. Pulling her in closer will move her nose away from your breast. How can you tell if your baby is well attached? First, observe your baby on your breast. Her mouth should be wide open instead of nearly closed. Her chin should be pressed into the breast, not away from the breast. More areola should be seen above the baby's mouth. Her lower lip should be turned out, like a fish, not turned inward. Though in many well-attached babies, the lower lip is often hidden in the breast. Your baby's cheeks should be rounded, not sucked in. Also, if the baby keeps coming off the breast, she probably isn't well attached. Next, look to see if your baby is drinking well by observing the motion of her jaw. If she's drinking well, her jaw will drop distinctly as she swallows. The baby who is not getting much milk will have a continuous fast sucking pattern without pauses.
Okay, I'm going to stop that one there. I love that video. The links to the two videos I've shown will be included. They're actually included at the end of the slideshow, but I think they're going to be included in the comments or in the details about the video as well, so that you can download them and have a look yourselves. So we know how to feed our baby. We know what we're looking for in terms of how to bring them to the breast and how to know when they're hungry. So how do we know how much our baby needs? How do we know that they're getting enough? Well, some of the things that you can look out for is for your baby to be relaxed when they're feeding. So they need to be awake. You don't want your baby to be falling asleep very quickly as soon as they start feeding, because they probably won't get enough milk. So you want them to be awake, but you want them to be relaxed and comfortable looking at the breast. And you need it to be comfortable for you as well. You want your baby to be happy in between feeds or comfortably sleeping, so they're not seeming agitated or anything like that. In the early weeks, you're going to be seeing your midwife quite often, and she will weigh your baby. So obviously, if your baby is gaining weight, then you know that they're getting enough milk as well. Something that you will notice when you feed your baby, especially in those early weeks, is that your breasts feel much softer after your baby's fed, which is good, because removing that milk tells your body that it needs to keep making some. Now, the other thing that you can look at to help you know is what's going on with your baby's nappies. So obviously, if something's going in at the top, something's got to be coming out at the bottom. So the first thing to talk about is how often your baby's peeing, how often your baby's urinating. So for your baby should pee once for every day of life for the first week of their life, up to the first week, and then you should be expecting 6 to 8 pees a day. Light coloured urine, not strong smelling. So if you notice that your baby's urine starts to get darker or stronger smelling, then you might want to consider whether or not they need some more feeds, and obviously discuss that with your midwife as well. As for the bowel movements, their poos, they will change a lot during that first week, and that's a really good indicator that your baby is getting breast milk and that their digestive system's kicking into action. So on day 1, your baby will pass what's called meconium, and it's usually black, kind of sticky and messy. After that, from around day 2, you'll notice that your baby's poo is darker. They will probably poo twice on the second day. It will be a kind of a dark brown rather than that black sticky meconium. By day 4, you will see that the colour has changed, probably more to a kind of a greeny browny yellow colour, and they're probably going to poo at least twice a day, probably a bit more by then. And then by the end of the first week, possibly around day 5, but certainly by the end of the first week, you'll see that their poo is more of a mustardy yellow colour, and it might look kind of seedy, or there are bits in it, and that's fine and normal too. And then it should stay that way for at least the first 6 weeks. It will stay that colour. They should be pooing several times a day. Sometimes it's at least twice a day for some babies, but often it will be every feed with a lot of babies. But that range is normal, but they should be pooing at least twice a day, soft yellow stools by the end of the first week. So we talked about following the baby's cues and responding to those and feeding your baby according to that. But sometimes you will notice that you're constantly feeding your baby. They're always giving you those cues that they're hungry, and it seems as though whatever you do, it's just not enough, and sometimes it can make you question whether you've got enough milk or whether your baby's getting enough milk. So knowing those signs that your baby's getting enough milk can be reassuring, even when this is happening. And it's called cluster feeding, and it's very normal. It often happens when your baby's having a growth spurt. So this is your baby's way of saying, I'm going to take a heck of a lot of milk for the next couple of days because I want you to make more because I'm growing. And this happens usually somewhere around the end of the first week, 10 days, around about 2 to 3 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, and then again at about 3 months, 4 months. It's often quite a big one, 6 months and 9 months. Now they're averages, just the amount your baby drinks, the amount your baby poos and weighs, when your baby has growth spurts, they're all averages, and your baby is a unique and individual human being just as you are, so they're not going to do necessarily everything bang on those days, but if you expect that behavior around about those times, then knowing that that's normal is sometimes helpful. The best thing you can do is keep feeding your baby. You might notice as well after the first 2 or 3 weeks that your baby seems to have a pattern of being very fussy at a particular time of the day, and exhibits that same kind of behavior of wanting to feed and not being settled and a little bit all over the place. It can start for a lot of babies late afternoon, early evening, and it might go on for a couple of hours or right through the evening until everybody's ready to go to bed. Again, it's very normal. Being as responsive as you can, offering your baby feeds, and you'll probably find if it's this evening cluster feeding that your baby will have lots of feeds that seem to be very short, and your breast may feel quite empty, and it's very easy to believe that you don't have enough milk or something's going wrong. But it is completely normal. Feed as much as you can, hold your baby as much as you can, eat your dinner over the top of your baby's head while they're feeding. Keep giving them one breast after the other, and I promise you it does pass. It's your baby's way of making sure that you have plenty of milk, and in the evening they're getting that lovely high fat content, small quantity feeds that really help fill them up and help them grow. So it is normal. It does get easier, I promise. So you might hear people talking about different types of milk. You sometimes hear people talking about fore milk and hind milk. And I'm talking about this here because it's the kind of thing that comes up when babies are going through growth spurts or they're having these fussy evenings, and people start to talk about, oh, make sure your baby gets enough hind milk, and maybe they're not getting enough hind milk, and that's why they're behaving this way. So I just want to talk about this because there are not really two types of milk. People talk about fore milk and hind milk as though there are two separate things that you have in your breast, and that's not true. You have breast milk, and it changes. It changes during the day. It changes. It'll be different on one day than it is on another day. It will change in response to your baby's health and any viruses and bugs and things in the atmosphere that you're exposed to. And so it's constantly changing. But there's not two types of milk. So I like to think about it. I talk about a hot tap. So if you think when you turn on your hot tap, the first water you get is actually cold. And the longer you leave that tap running, the warmer the milk gets. So you run it for a little while and it's warm, you keep going and it gets really hot. So if you think of that in terms of your breast milk, when you start to feed, your milk is what people would call fore milk. So it's the higher sugar content, lower fat content milk, and it's thirst quenching, and it's the first milk that comes from your breast when you start to feed. The longer you feed, the fattier your milk gets. The fat globules come down from the walls of the milk duct and mix in with the milk as the feed continues. So it's like running the hot tap, going from cold to warm to hot. So the longer you feed, you go from not very much fat to a bit more fat to even more fat. So the longer you leave your baby to feed, and if you let them decide when they want to finish the feed, they're going to get as much of that fatty milk as they want. And it doesn't change after 5 minutes or 10 minutes or 7 minutes or something like that. It just gradually changes throughout the feed, which is why it's important not to time feeds if you can. So here's a picture of some milk. So the milk on the left does have fat in it. It's completely normal human milk. And if you've not seen it before, it can be a little bit disconcerting because it does look a bit watery. And it's easy to think, wow, that cannot possibly be enough to sustain my baby, but it is. If that milk sat for a while, then you would see a thin layer of fat on the top of that milk. The milk on the right is also breast milk, and it's just milk that's been expressed later on in a feed. And if you left it to stand, it would separate out into some milk that looks like that on the left, and then a fatty layer across the top. I sometimes think of it as kind of as a three-course meal. You start with your light starter, maybe a light soup, move on to your main course, which is a little bit heavier and a little bit fattier. And then if you're hungry enough, you keep on going to your wonderful dessert, which is usually laden with calories and deliciousness. And that's what your baby's doing. They will be determining at any feed whether they want all 3 courses or just 2 courses. And when I talked about your baby feeding for as long as they want to, and then If they're still unsettled when they come off, offering the second side, that's the kind of thing that you might notice more when your baby's having a growth spurt, and they might want all 3 courses and then all 3 courses again. And if they're really hungry, they might go back to the first breast again and just finish off with another starter, just to make sure they're really full. So if you act as the most gracious hostess by always offering, then you're probably not going to go too far wrong. So if we're talking about following our baby's cues and really always doing what our baby is asking, how does that fit in with routines? So honestly, most babies don't have a routine for a good while, and it's completely normal. Babies are looking for their basic needs to be met. So they're looking for warmth, comfort, love, and obviously nutrition. And all of those things can be met by breastfeeding and keeping your baby close. Babies expect to be held 24/7. It's a natural survival instinct for them. Human babies are completely dependent on their caregivers. They're probably the most immature mammals born, the most incapable mammals. So especially for the first 3 months, you will notice that your baby probably will not settle when you put them down. It may seem that they're asleep and they're comfortable, and you lay them down and 30 seconds later they're awake again. And because they're awake and unsettled, the thing they're going to look for is you and the breast, because that's what makes them feel safe. So you'll often end up having to do another little feed, they'll fall asleep again, and they'll stay that way until you put them down. We're pretty well trained by modern society to behave ourselves, stick to our schedules, be places on time, don't let babies rule the roost, don't let them take over, and all of that kind of thing. And it's very difficult to kind of switch off that part and go with our kind of instinctive beliefs. So people will ask, are they a good baby? And by that, they're often saying, does your baby sleep all night? And of course, your baby is not sleeping all night because they need to feed, and they may well feed 2 or 3 times a night while they're young. But it changes quite quickly. And after 3 months, you often will see your baby starting to behave in a particular way at a particular time of day. And you might start to see some very loose routines or patterns starting to evolve. And just so you know, technically sleeping through the night is 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep. It's not 7 p.m. to 7 a.m., which is often what a lot of people think when they're saying, is your baby a good baby? So trying to keep your baby close, and you might find baby wearing is really good, using wraps or slings and things like that that allow your baby to stay nice and close to you where they feel secure, but you can still have your hands free to do some other things, especially if you've got other children to look after as well. But it does change. I promise you, the first 3 months might feel like a blur, but after that, it seems as though sanity starts to come back to us. So what about partners? We've got all this breastfeeding going on, which obviously most partners aren't able to do. So where do they fit in? We often hear people worried that if their partners aren't feeding the baby, then how are they going to bond? But breastfeeding is not the only way to bond with babies, and feeding in itself isn't the only way to bond with babies. So things to look at for partners to be doing is skin to skin with their baby, which is amazing. Babies love skin to skin with our partners just as much as they do with their mums. So that's a wonderful thing to do. And it's wonderful actually at any age, not just in that first couple of weeks. Bathing the baby, either bathing the baby on their own or getting in the bath with the baby or in the shower. And if you're worried about holding on to this slippery little wet baby, then keep them in a onesie or a singlet, and then that gives you something else to grip onto. Playing, reading, singing, dancing, massage, all of those things are wonderful and things that partners can do just as much as mums. Wearing the baby, partners can do that just as well. And the other thing, of course, that after 6 months, which seems like a long time, but it's less time than the length of your pregnancy, you're going to start to get into the world of your baby starting solids. And that's something definitely that you can both do together. So when it comes to giving bottles, it's best if you can avoid doing that for the first few weeks. If you can get breastfeeding established and really get things going well so that your baby and you are really in tune with each other in terms of feeding and how that works, then you might want to consider giving a bottle after that. In the early weeks, while your milk supply is still being established, if your baby is given a bottle, then instead of a breastfeed, then you still need to express at that time to make sure that your supply is maintained, so that when your baby doesn't have a bottle at that time, you still have breast milk to feed them. So it doesn't actually give you a break in any way, really, to give your baby a bottle at that stage. That's not to say you shouldn't do it, but it's just something to consider. But there are lots of other options. So just weigh out the pros and cons and think about how that might work. Some of the common concerns that come up, and a couple of these are the most common reasons that people give for stopping breastfeeding: painful feeding, blocked ducts and mastitis, and concerns about supply. Now, breastfeeding shouldn't hurt, and you often hear people saying, well, it will hurt to start with, but you'll get used to it. Pain is your body's way of saying don't do it. If it hurts, then something's going wrong. So often the things that contribute to painful feeding are most often to do with either the position or the way the baby's attaching at the breast. So things to consider: is the baby close to the mum? Is the baby's body facing the mum's body? Are the baby's arms either side of the breast rather than tucked between the mum and the baby, making the baby pull away from the breast and or making it difficult for them to be as close as they should be? Is the baby coming to the breast with their chin and bottom jaw first, or are they kind of face planting with their nose? Is the baby slipping off of the breast for some reason while they're feeding? All of those things can cause painful feeding, but can usually be remedied with a really small adjustment to the position or attachment. Blocked ducts are often caused by milk not being removed effectively. So milk's either being left in the breast that's causing a problem, or the flow of the milk is being interrupted by something else. So if the baby's not feeding well, it can lead to blocked ducts. The other things that can cause this problem are things like a bra that doesn't fit properly and is putting pressure on the breast somewhere. If the mum's holding her breast and her fingers or thumb are squeezing too hard, that can block the flow of the milk. It can even be random things like the strap of a bag, a baby carrier, seatbelt, the way the mum's lying at night and just putting pressure on her breast. So they're all things to be considered if that's a problem. The important thing to do when that happens is to get the milk moving. So you need to remove that blocked area as soon as possible. Now, it may just feel like one little lump, like a little chickpea kind of sized lump in the breast, or it might feel like an area of the breast that feels solid. It may or may not be sore. But the things that people usually try are either getting the baby in a position where their bottom jaw is in line with the area that feels blocked, which can be really helpful, but it can lead to some really complicated and tricky breastfeeding positions. Some people do what they call dangle feeding, where they are on all fours over their baby. So the breast is dangling into the baby's mouth, trying to use gravity to help pull the milk through. But the other thing that most often helps is going back to the breast massage and hand expressing. And you need to be massaging the breast from behind where the block is, massaging down through the blocked area to try and get that milk flowing. And it's usually thickened milk that's got stuck in the milk duct that just needs to be worked through. So if you're expressing, you may see the milk coming out as kind of like thickened strings of milk. If your baby's feeding and they get that milk, it's fine. It's not off, it's just thickened milk. If that area starts to get sore and red, or you notice kind of streaks across the breast, you start to feel unwell, cold, fluey, shivery, shaky, feverish, then It could be developing into mastitis, and really the best thing to do at that stage is get hold of your midwife or GP and get a prescription for antibiotics. It's not something that you should ignore and wait and see, because it can develop quite quickly into an abscess and a hospital visit and things that you really want to avoid if you can. The low supply concern can come up in various ways. Sometimes with the baby doing the cluster feeding and the growth spurts, it can be concerning. Sometimes it's more to do with the frequency of the baby's feeds. The majority of mums do have enough milk for their baby. So if you look at your baby's weight gain, their general behavior, what's happening with their nappies, most of the time those things will give you the answer that you have plenty of milk. Every breast is different, so each breast for each mum will be different, and every mum's breast will be different from somebody else's. So for some mums, they may make enough milk and have enough milk in their breast at any given time that they can feed their baby 8 times a day, and that works. For other mums, because of the way they make milk and the amount of milk they can store in their breast at any time, they may need to feed their baby 12 times a day. So comparing the frequency of feeds with one mum compared to another mum isn't helpful, and doesn't mean that one mum has a low supply and a problem. It just means that we're all different. Expressing is also not a good indicator of how much milk you've got. Your baby's mouth works perfectly with your breast to remove milk, and no machine or your hands is going to be as effective. So if you're concerned about low supply, expressing to see how much milk you've got isn't necessarily going to be helpful. If your baby's not gaining weight, or their urine starts to become darker coloured or stronger smelling, or you genuinely think they're not peeing as much as they were, or they're not pooing, then absolutely talk to your midwife or whoever's looking after you and your baby at that stage. So that's kind of common concerns, basics of breastfeeding. A pretty short and quick run through. There's always more that we could talk about, but we could be here for hours. So send in questions if you want to, and I can try and answer those. Every mum and baby is unique. What works for one mum and baby won't necessarily work for somebody else. If you're worried, always talk to your midwife, your wild child provider, breastfeeding specialist, lactation consultant, and see if they can give you some support and information that helps. And if you're working with somebody and you just feel that it's just not answering your questions, or the information you're giving just doesn't feel right for you, then ask somebody else, because there's often more than one way to help with these kind of issues and concerns. So get more input until you find the things that work for you. So the next couple of slides are just some information on the videos that I've shared, and where I've got the images and photos that I've used throughout the presentation. Various ways to get hold of me, emails and social medias. If you want a copy of the presentation to use, or just for your own knowledge, I'm completely happy to share that. So if you drop me an email, I can get that sent to you. Otherwise, thank you very much for listening. Happy World Breastfeeding Week, everybody. Protect breastfeeding. It is absolutely a shared responsibility, and we can all help. Thanks very much.